what your comments would be on that observation.
Yes, I would say, as you all know, the Rodin aftercasts after his death in 1917 until about 1952 were almost all done legally by the Alex Roudier foundry. But in the interval after that, Georges Roudier, who was the nephew of Eugene, who took over who was the Alex Roudier, essentially, continued to cast for the Musée Rodin, and also Godard, Seuss, and Coubertin produced casts in that interval. And frankly, the patina from all of those different foundries are all a little different than what was being executed by Roudier during Rodin's lifetime and immediately in the 10 or 15 years after his death. So that's when the Limay brothers, or Limay's patination shop still was run as it had been during his lifetime.
We didn't really talk very much about the posthumous one,
but there is a substantial difference in the depth and appearance of the patination, more apparent on the indoor pieces than on the outdoor pieces. The outdoor pieces are harder to judge because they've gone through the weathering cycle, but you can see the differences very clearly on the interior pieces, and some of it is a reflection of the bronze technology. Most of those later casters, foundries, are actually a lot of them are lost wax rather than the sand casting of the Roudiers. And the Roudiers finished their pieces very differently at different times.
I'd add to that. Well, first of all, the Musée Rodin must deal with more than one foundry. That's a legal issue. They cannot deal solely with a single foundry, although they do. The majority of the works that come from are being cast now come from Coubertin, which is a great, great foundry, and I admire them very much. But the taste of Coubertin is for a shinier finish than a Roudier finish. And so the look of recent casts is often very shiny. It's a different kind of finish, and it's a taste.
I mean, the whole issue of posthumous casting, I think, is problematic. And it seems to be really exists mostly with Rodin and Degas. It seems to be a French. Well, I go to foundries. I rarely see, posthumous. I see posthumous work.
Remington.
What?
Remington, Aiken.
What?
Remington.
Aiken.
Yeah.
Hosts of other 19th century sculptures.
But anyway, I think it's absolutely abusive. And if the artist is around, I mean, the artist can control the cast. Even if he doesn't go there, eventually sees when he thinks the foundry's not doing a good job, and he corrects it, or he paints the piece, or does something.
If we had no posthumous casts, we would have no Gates of Hell, which Rodin was desperate to have in bronze.
There's a plaster Gates.
We would have no Balzac in bronze, which he also. I mean, it was his dream. It was the big failure, and it was the big dream.
Maybe with Rodin it's okay, because he was so much involved with reproduction.
Yeah.
But I mean, I cast bronze. I could.
But historically, say back in the 18th century, things were being
bronze was just kicked out.
We have a question, I think, right at the back? No, right. So, yes. And then Richard Deacon.
To Joel Shapiro's remarks, posthumous casting is the legacy of Droit de Suivre. The whole existence of the Musée Rodin and Rodin's legacy was predicated on his understanding that right of succession would follow from the creation of that entity. And it's fairly common in auctions of the 19th century, for example, that an artist's estate would go up for auction, and you would buy the original plaster, so-called, and that would be sold at the Hotel Drouot with the droit de suivre,
right.
Meaning that you, as the purchaser of that plaster, could then go off and make an addition. So it's a question of intent on the part of the artist and how he or she perceives his or her legacy in what follows subsequent that doesn't mean that there isn't a difference of degree between something the artist actually has a hand on and that which happens out of sight. But it nevertheless conforms to a certain notion of intentionality that seems very important to why these things exist.
And it's also problematic.
No doubt.
No.
Richard, and then the back.
Richard D. I just want to ask Ruth, do you know when that photograph from the, well, not Ruth, if she has a date for that photograph from the Jardin de Luxembourg?
I'm assuming it would have been after the 1889 Universal Exhibition, during the 90s, because it wasn't brought out of the garden again until 1900.
The surface is incredibly pitted in that photograph. Looks
And I did ask Anne Pajot this summer, the curator at the Musée d'Orsay, if it had ever been restored, and she said no. And it does have lots of very dead spots on it. It's, you know, it's very opaque, and you can see that it's been out of doors for more than 15 years.
Yeah, Chris Pearson from Trinity University. I just had a question about the surface treatment of the plaster, which we were looking at. It seems that Rodin had some interest in presenting the plasters as works of art in themselves. I'm just wondering whether we have some indication of his preferences as to the surface treatment of the plasters.
Well, just a general point, in the 19th century, it was common to exhibit plaster casts in lieu of a bronze or a marble in order to get a commission for it. And so they were treated as both, depending on the artist, both de facto works of art or other times as a placeholder for what could be.
It goes back to the 18th century, the salon.
And so with this one, much of the sort of variability of the surface and what almost looks like a if you could call it that, a patina on the plaster, which is an incorrect term, but comes from the casting process itself, the way that was used from other things. I don't, as terms of the treatment of the plasters, as far as I know, the ones that he exhibited in the 80s, he left as is. I mean, he didn't want to vary them. He wanted them to be pristine.
He loved the whiteness of plaster. He just loved it. And any of you who haven't been to Meudon, when you get a chance, go and see those beautiful, beautiful plasters. It's just as thrilling as seeing the in-town museum. It's so, and that Rodin loved that look. He loved his studio. He loved the look of very white, well-kept, clean plaster.
But not to over-characterize him and put him in a box, he also did intentionally color his plasters from time to time. And he was very careful about how his plasters were made. And Guilloche, father and son, and all of those people who worked for him were very precise about how they had to model things and so on. For instance, when they put the thinker out in front of the Panthéon to test fit it, as it were, in plaster, they actually patinated, they painted it the color of the of what patination it would be to see how it would look when it was set there. So he wasn't just a one-song guy. I mean, he had other things to do.
It was just very common practice, though, to put a gesso coat and wax in for presentations. So beeswax and turpentine would be put on sometimes.
Beeswax on the plasters?
On the gesso plaster, yeah.
Should we just have one? I think we've got time for one last question. Shelley Sloan.
I wanted to go back to what Ruth.
Wanted to go back to the comment Ruth made about the Coubertin patina being shinier and a matter of taste, and combine that with Penelope this morning when Derek said that your feeling was the Age of Bronze looks beautiful in the way it does. And I was trying to link that with what Adam said last night also about patina and our response being in the passage of time. And we have to remember that Penelope's feeling of this looking beautiful has very much to do with the late 20th century, early 21st century ideology. And I was reminded of a time, I was telling this to a couple of people, when we had Adolf Gottlieb's sculpture that we were treating that looked very much like the streaked Rodin. We were working on it and trying to go somewhere in that middle ground of leaving some of the outdoor patina and then touching in others. And then Judith Shea, a contemporary artist, walked into our lab and went, "Oh my God, you're not going to take any of that off, are you? I spent 6 months trying to get my sculpture to look like that." So it's all very much our perception of beauty has to do with where we're coming from. Because look at the example that Derek gave of the right after World War II with all of the sculptures looking black. Or in the 19th century, we've got lots of Renaissance terracottas where the polychromy was taken off because the sensibility was to get rid of the color. So our sense of beauty is going to change very much as well. So I just want to keep people to remember that.
Thank you very much. I think that's a good point to end on before we go on to the presentation about the
we all think that the Parthenon frieze looks pretty good, don't we?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the